I didn't oppose. Start this war. I just built a fence, that's it. But when those HOA plastic badge boys decided they were going to cut my wire and try to carve a road through my legacy, I answered them with 8,000 volts of pure Texas justice. And believe me, they weren't into oppos. Smiling when we finally walked out of that courtroom. You see, my name is Silas Thorne, and this stretch of sun-baked, cedar-choked dirt has been in the Thorne family since 1934, back when my granddad broke the first post hole with nothing but a rusted pry bar in hands that didn't into oppos. Know how to quit, and he survived the Dust Bowl. My father survived the Inopos, 50s drought, and a tornado that peeled the roof off our barn like a sardine can. And now it's my turn to hold the line, 140 acres of quiet, where the only thing you hear at 5 a.m. is the whine through the blue stem and the occasional coyote laughing at the moon. And for most of my 60 years, that was enough. The trouble didn't in oppos. Start with a bang. It started with the sound of bulldozers a mile north, where a developer with too much hair gel and not enough sense decided to build in, quote, Whispering Pines Estates, end quote. A subdivision of cookie-cutter McMansions with lawns so green they look radioactive, and rules about everything from the color of your mailbox to the height of your bird bath. At first, I didn't in oppos. I figured they'd stay on their side of the ridge and I'd stay on mine. But there's something about people who live and manage communities that makes them think the whole world should be managed by them. And one morning, while I was out on the porch scratching my old hound, Buster, behind the ears, I noticed an SUV idling at my gate, just sitting there like a vulture waiting for something to die. A few days later, the first letter arrived, and it was the kind of envelope that's too thick, too white, and smells like a lawyer's waiting room. Addressed to, in quote, property owner, in quote, from a man named Sterling Vance, the president of the Whispering Pines HOA. The letter told me, in a tone so polite it made my skin crawl, that my northern boundary fence was an, in quote, unauthorized visual obstruction, in quote, that didn't in oppos, meet the, in quote, aesthetic harmony, in quote, of their community, and they gave me 30 days to tear it down or face daily fines. Which gave me a good laugh because my deed was signed by a governor before Sterling Vance's father was even a glimmer in anyone in oppos. I ignored it, figured it was a clerical error, a city boy getting his maps crossed, but 2 weeks later the second letter came, and this one wasn't in oppos. Asking, it was claiming that my land actually belonged to the, in quote, community easement, end quote, and included a satellite map with a thick red line drawn 40 feet into my pasture. I'm a quiet man. I don in oppos. Go looking for a fight, but you don in oppos. Survived 3 generations of Texas ranching by being a doormat. So I wrote back on a piece of yellow legal pad, in all caps, telling them my land was private, my fence was staying, and they could take their, in quote, harmony, in quote, and shove it where the sun dawned into oppos. Shine. That's when the, end quote, security, end quote, showed up, 2 kids in polo shirts and khakis, looking like they'd never spent a day in the sun without SPF 50. And I watched them on my trail cams as they stood at my fence line with clipboards, pointing at my cedar posts like they were looking at a crime scene. I saw the bigger one, a guy who looked like he'd spent more time in a gym than a workspace, put his boot on my wire and try to shake the post, and I just sat there in my darkened living room, watching the feed on my tablet, thinking, son, you have no idea whose tail you're stepping on. Then came the night the line was crossed, literally, and I went out for my morning inspection only to find the top 2 strands of my high-tensile wire snipped clean with bolt cutters, not frayed by a deer or snapped by a fallen limb, but cut by a human hand under a, in quote, no trespassing, in quote, sign. My blood didn't in oppos. Boil, it went cold, which is a lot more dangerous, so I called up an old friend from the service, Daniel, in quote, directs, in quote, Garza, who's now a lawyer with a mouth like a chainsaw and a mind for the fine print, and I told him, in quote, Danny, they're trying to move the goalposts on me, in quote, and he just chuckled and said, in quote, Silas, let him try. Just make sure you document every time they breathe on your dirt, end quote. I decided to upgrade the fence, not just with wire, but with a solar-powered energizer that could kick like a mule, and I spent 3 days sinking new steel core posts and running a dummy line right where they cut it before, but this time I rigged a little surprise, a pressurized dye pack hidden behind a knot hole in the post, the kind they use in bank bags, filled with neon green ink that doesn't in oppos. Come off for a week. At 1:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. and I watched in high-definition infrared as a figure in a hoodie crawled out of the brush with bolt cutters, looking left and right like he was some kind of commando, and the second he squeezed those cutters on the dummy wire, pop, a cloud of neon green exploded right into his face. He yelped like a kicked pup, stumbling backward into the dirt, rubbing his eyes, and cussing so loud the microphone picked it up clear as a bell, and he scrambled back toward the subdivision, looking like a radioactive swamp monster. The next morning, the man of the hour, Sterling Vance himself, rolled down my driveway in a black Mercedes that looked like it was terrified of a little gravel, and he stepped out looking every bit the corporate shark, his hair perfectly coiffed despite the Texas wind. He didn't oppose, tee off for a handshake. He just stood there with his leather folio and said, Mr. Thorne, things are getting messy, and frankly, my board is losing patience with your eccentricities, I leaned against the porch railing, took a slow sip of black coffee, and said, Sterling, you're the one who sent a neon green trespasser onto my land. So if anyone's being eccentric, it's the guy currently scrubbing his face with industrial soap, His eyes narrowed, and that fake salesman smile vanished, replaced by something cold and hungry, and he leaned in and said, Look, Silas, let's be adults. That northern strip of yours is standing in the way of a multi-million-dollar expansion, a road that needs to go through so we can reach the new phase of the development, and I'm authorized to offer you $60,000 to just walk away and let us redraw the boundary. I looked him dead in the eye, felt the digital recorder in my pocket spinning, and I said, and if I don an oppose, if I decide that 60 grand ISN and oppose, worth the dirt my granddad bled for, Sterling laughed a dry, hollow sound and said, then we'll bury you in litigation, we'll file environmental complaints, safety violations, we'll make it so expensive for you to keep this land that you'll be begging us to take it for free, because in this world, Silas, paper beats dirt every single time. I didn't oppose, say a word, I just pointed toward my gate and said, get off my land, Sterling, before I decide to see if that Mercedes can handle a cattle prod, and he huffed, adjusted his tie, and drove off, thinking he'd won, thinking he'd scared the old rancher into submission. But I didn't oppose. Go to the bank. I went to the county records office, where a lady named Mrs. Higgins, who's been filing paperwork since the dawn of time, pulled up my original land grant, and she looked at the HOAs map and then at the official survey, and let out a long, slow whistle. Silas, she said, these Whispering Pines folks didn't oppose. Just get it wrong. They're trying to steal a 40-foot lane that they've already sold to a construction firm for a feeder road, and they did it while knowing your deed was ironclad. Monday morning in the Travis County Courthouse felt like a funeral, but not for me. And when Sterling Vance walked in with his high-priced lawyer, they looked like they were attending a coronation, whispering and laughing in the front row. The judge was an old-school Texan named Miller, a man who didn't oppose. Have much patience for fluff, and the HOA lawyer stood up and spent 20 minutes talking about, public safety, hazardous fencing, and how I was a, reclusive obstructionist, endangering the harmony of the community. Then it was our turn, and Danny Garza stood up, adjusted his lucky boots, and didn't oppose. Say a word. He just pulled up the video of the neon green commando getting blasted by the die pack, and the whole courtroom went silent before a few people in the back started snickering. The judge leaned forward, looking at the screen, and said, Mr. Vance, is that one of your employees trespassing on Mr. Thorne's land with bolt cutters? Sterling turned a shade of white that matched his shirt, and his lawyer tried to object, but Danny was just getting started, and he played the recording of Sterling threatening to, bury me in litigation, and admitting they wanted the land for a road expansion. Then came the, kill shot, The official county survey compared to the HOA's fabricated map, showing that they had intentionally lied to their own members and the court to try and seize private property for a corporate payoff. Judge Miller didn't oppose. To even go back to his chambers to deliberate. He just sat there, took off his glasses, and looked at Sterling Vance with a look that would have withered a cactus, and he said, In 40 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a blatant, premeditated display of greed and deception. End quote. He ruled that my fence was 100% legal, that the HOA had zero jurisdiction over my acreage, and then he dropped the hammer, awarding me $160,000 in damages for trespass, property destruction, and attempted fraud, and then he referred Sterling Vance to the district attorney's office for a criminal investigation into land fraud. I walked out of that courthouse into the bright Texas sun, and I didn't oppose. Feel triumphant. I just felt settled. And as Sterling Vance was being swarmed by his own angry HOA members who realized their dues were about to go toward my new barn, I just climbed in my truck and drove home. Now, Whispering Pines is a lot quieter. The letters have stopped, and there's a new group in town called the Boundary Guard, a bunch of us local ranchers who share maps and legal fees to make sure no other developer thinks they can redraw the world to suit their bottom line. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it, Oppos? How many people out there have lost their backyard, their history, or their peace of mind because they didn't oppose? Have a trail cam and a die pack. Was I right to go to war over 40 feet of dirt, or is there a point where we should all just, harmonize, for the sake of the neighborhood? Some people say I'm a hero for standing up to the suits. Others say I'm just a stubborn old man who made a mountain out of a molehill and ruined a community's reputation in the process. So what do you think? Would you have fought for the dirt, or would you have taken the 60 grand and stayed quiet? Let me know in the comments, because out here, the fences are high, but the talk is free, and I'm curious to see where you draw the line. Don and Oppos, forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you think the little guy deserves a win every once in a while, and I'll see you on the next one.